Good morning. I am Carrie Ann Zamora Frazier, a doctoral student at the University of Southern California. I'm also a clinical social worker with 20 years experience in the field, as well as an associate professor. My topic today is a reimagined response to domestic violence. I believe everyone deserves to feel safe. Unfortunately, that is not the case for 1 in 4 women in America. I think of women like Megan. Megan was a vibrant 23-year-old who was killed by her 26-year-old husband. They were married for just 2 short years. When the police responded to the 911 call, baby Cody, a 14-month-old, was still strapped in his car seat with blood splatters over him. He was the only witness to his mother's death. I was called in as an expert witness on the case, and as I began to comb through the files with the prosecutor, I saw it. It was plain as day, the gaps in services. Megan had been to the police on at least 12 different occasions. She had sought help from domestic violence shelters on at least 3 different occasions. She had even been to the emergency room on at least 4 different occasions. Her family knew of some of the abuse. Her neighbors had heard the fights, and the daycare even suspected domestic abuse. But the systems which Megan needed to protect her did not communicate effectively to connect the dots. It was only in her death and through the testimony of all the individuals in the systems was the prosecutor able to connect the dots. This is a wicked problem. The system designed to help victims are not effective, and the professionals within the system are not operating efficiently, thus perpetuating recidivism of domestic violence. It means that the cycle continues because the systems do not talk to each other. Every minute, 20 persons fall victim to domestic violence, and this equates to more than 10 million women and men each year. Just a year ago, in April 2020, there were over 690,000 cases of domestic violence. In these types of calls, police officers are the first to respond. On an average, police officers respond to 240 million 911 calls per year. And over 80% of those calls are service related. The calls that law enforcement respond to when it comes to domestic violence, we're just talking about domestic violence portions, almost 50% of those calls are non-physical domestic violence calls. These are calls of emotional and psychological abuse. So what does that mean? It means that domestic violence on a whole, it is physical. It's hitting, punching, biting, pushing, shoving. It is where physical evidence is left on the victim, or at least in the environment. Domestic violence is also financial, and it can be sexual. But there's a large portion of domestic violence that is emotional and mental control that one person has over the other. This type of abuse is harder to decipher because it is not something that can be assessed quickly in a once in a while meeting. It takes skilled training and assessment. The current model for police officers is to respond to a 911 call, identify safety, identify, is there a victim, is there a perpetrator? If that cannot be identified, then oftentimes a card is left for follow-up. If the police officers respond to a call and there is evidence that there has been a physical alteration, then there may be an arrest. And once again, a card is left for a victim to follow up with social services. This current model is a gap in the system. And law enforcement are not well trained to identify those gaps. In 13 to 19 weeks, if you look at any police department throughout the United States, the training academies are 13 to 19 weeks. 60% of that training is spent on firearms. 60 hours is spent on firearms. 51 hours is spent on physical fitness and 40 hours on self-defense. In any given 13 to 19-week training academy, only 8 hours of that training is dedicated for crisis intervention, such as domestic violence or mental health. The national trend suggests that placing social workers within police departments is something that we should aspire to do. And I agree, because social workers have more training and education in identifying trauma. But one of the things I also found in my research is that response is different from police department to police department, from county to county, state to state. And so the response is inconsistent. Again, we know that police officers, the 8 hours is ineffective. And social workers are trained to assess issues at a higher rate with 6 years of classroom and field experience. That's 6 years, that's 4 years of a bachelor's degree and 2 years of a master's degree in social work. So combined 6 years of experience of education. And if a social worker goes on for further specialization, that's an additional 3,000 hours of supervision. So both disciplines are essential, but they do not work collaboratively. If 80% of police work is social service related, then I would argue the opportunity exists for collaboration between the two. Here's my proposed solution. Social workers need to have one response model rather than the inconsistencies of police department, county, and state. How can this be achieved? I propose to develop a curriculum where social workers can obtain a specialized certification in police social work. I would like to collaborate with the Council on Social Work Education in order for this certificate to be nationally recognized as a premier certification for this specialization. The specialized training, the certification will ensure that social workers across the nation are using the same skill set and tools based on one training model. We know that the danger assessment or the lethality assessment by Jackie Campbell, it is a proven evidence-based tool that social workers can utilize in their response. Part 2 of that training is social workers, after they have obtained that certification, is to partner with police academies and police stations to train together to respond effectively. In order for police departments in any city in the state of Texas to put a new police officer on the street, the average city spends approximately $100,000 for that year. A well-trained social worker with a graduate degree and licensure in the state of Texas, the average salary is $60,000 a year. This is a savings of $40,000 for the cities. So what would this look like? This would look like a social worker responding to police calls with police officers. And while police officers assess safety, then the social worker is able to is able to complete a lethality assessment, a danger assessment, a basic needs assessment, and fill in the gaps in services, whether it is shelter services, hospitals, courts. That social worker serves as a consistent person to help the victim navigate the systems. That way there aren't any more gaps in the system. There aren't any more Megans. That's what a reimagined response would look like. It is a partnership with the CSWE, the Council on Social Work Education, as well as the National Association for Social Workers and police departments. Imagine if Megan had a social worker. Imagine if someone were able to meet with Megan at the first or second call. What if someone were able to talk to the neighbors, talk to the family members? What if someone were able to talk to the shelter providers, the emergency room nurses or social workers? What if someone were able to be at the police department with Megan to help her navigate the systems? What if Megan had a way out? Maybe Cody would still have his mommy today. This is my reimagined response.